everyone, it's me, Sean Capri. Welcome to the Extra Mile, the tag-along podcast to the Nintendo Drive, where we dive deeper into the games and services you care about the most. Today, Ryan Turford joins me to review Metroid Dread, so let's jump right on into the Nintendo Drive. Ball!
Hello, Sean Capri.
Ryan Turford, I have completed Metroid Dread. Yes, everybody can bow before my gaming greatness. I have beaten it. How are you doing, my friend?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. I've been eagerly waiting for you to finish this game, Sean, because I also finished Metroid Dread, and boy howdy, we got lots of stuff to talk about on the show.
Now we can play it on hard mode.
Oh yeah, I'm actually, to be fair, I'm actually doing that right now. I'm actually
oh my
excited
gosh
to talk about that experience as well, because it's pretty fun on hard mode, Sean.
Oh man, I think I'm good for a little while, Ryan. I think that I thought I might have been playing on hard mode by accident, and then but that's not the case. I played on normal mode, and we've got a lot to talk about today, my friend. We've got a lot to dive into and dive deep into Metroid Dread. I have a feeling we're going to be coming at this from two different angles, and I'm very curious on how this is going to go.
Absolutely. So honestly, the first thing I wanted to start off with kind of our introduction to introduce us with this whole Metroid Dread situation, because we are coming from two very different angles, is how we got our start with Metroid. Is this our first Metroid game? And, where do we go from here? Sean, I'll start with you. What's your experience with the Metroid franchise? Is this your first game? What do you think?
This is the first one that I've endeavored to finish. I've played a lot of Super Metroid and the original Metroid, but never really I was always at a friend's house or even on Nintendo Switch Online or Virtual Console. I've had them all many times. Everybody's lamented over the years of repurchasing the same games on Nintendo forever. But I've always kind of jumped in that's cool and kind of just bounced off of it. I've never really anytime I've tried it, I never thought I was ever going to finish it. So I've played, my experience with Metroid is actually more in the genre of Metroidvanias rather than the namesake itself. So I don't know. I feel like that actually might have something to do with my take on all of this. There's a lot of the lore that I didn't feel left out, but it just didn't really land for me at all. So yeah, I think that kind of gives a landscape from how I'm approaching this thing.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to talk to you about that too, because I know a lot of the Metroidvanias that you've played have been melee focused ones and not so much, range kind of shooting ones.
Shooty.
More stuff like Ori or the Castlevania games is more of the Metroidvanias I know that you've played. So I think this will be an interesting approach. Whereas for me, I'm a longtime Metroid fan. I mean, my very first Metroid game was Metroid 2 Return of Samus on the original Game Boy. I remember my brother got it for his birthday, and he wasn't super excited about it because the one who was playing it all the time was me. And he was like, man, I wish I could be playing this game that I got for my birthday, but Ryan keeps stealing it from me. And having a great time just getting lost because that game was in two different colors, two different shades of green, and you couldn't tell where you were, and there was no map. It was an interesting experience. But Super Metroid is my all-time favorite game. Metroid is my favorite all-time series. Samus is my favorite all-time character. And I'm well-versed in the ways of Metroid. I've played every single Metroid game, including Metroid Prime Pinball and Metroid Prime Federation Force. So, yeah, I love Metroid.
But is it as good as Sonic Spinball, Ryan? That's what people want to know.
Oh, dude, it's way better. Please.
Better? Wow.
Way better. And this is someone who
I see it.
You see this, but I love Sega and I love Sonic. And Sonic Spinball
I think most
not
people
as good.
don't like Sonic Spinball, but I think you and I maybe connect on that. We'll do a Sonic Spinball extra mile one day.
My God. So yeah, I love Metroid, and I can't be more excited to talk about it and kind of fill Sean's head with some of the lore, which, speaking of the story, we should probably get into kind of the story now that you kind of know where we're coming from and kind of do a little quick story.
Sorry, I want to add one more thing. And famously, anybody who's listened to me on the Nintendo Drive knows that when this was revealed earlier this year, was it just this year that this was revealed? Holy crap.
It was actually just at E3. They announced it at E3 and it's out now.
So it was almost was that right? I second guessed myself for a moment there. I was not excited at all. I was like, okay, that looks fine. I actually didn't think that it looked good at all. So my hype level pretty low actually coming into this thing. And for whatever reason, I decided to pick it up. I think maybe just because of a lull in the schedule. I didn't know what I was going to play and figured let's do it for the show. Let's go for a romp. But so I was not day one, push over children, get out of my way so that I can race up and buy this game. But
You're
got
not
it anyway.
Ryan Turford pushing over cable.
Exactly. Yeah, you pushed over all the kids and the old ladies. You took their canes and you threw them down the drain.
I'm getting the special edition, Sean, because if I don't get it, there is nothing right in this world if I don't actually get this.
That is man, that art book is just gigantic too.
It's pretty dope. I got that. I got the amiibos. Yeah, I'm.
I got the amiibo as well. Yep. So I spent way more than I thought that I would with Metroid Dread. They got me. That Nintendo, they got me
for sure. And I mean, it's not like anything else came out on October 6th or anything like that. And just 10 other games came out at the same time. I just find it funny that you said there's a lull there where you didn't have anything to play, but there's so many games.
Not on Switch. I feel like on Switch, they kind of own that. But anyways,
yeah, on Switch, anyways.
Maybe beside the point.
Yeah. So let's dive into the story that's in this game. Now, we probably won't spend too much time on it because, even though we've just finished the game and the story's not really a big part of the game, at least I would contest that. Sean, would you agree that maybe the story is it's more of a gameplay focused game rather than a story based game?
Gameplay, definitely, but I do feel I feel like there was a number of moments in there that, and this is a spoiler-free review. It's worth saying we are absolutely not going to be spoiling any story moments of the game. But I feel like it was kind of a nice balance. It does seem to just it focuses on getting you into the game first, right? And I feel like there's a reason why it is the namesake of the genre. Like the Metroidvania, it's the gameplay that carries over to all of those other games that kind of adopt or get inspiration from it. So yeah, definitely there's that. I don't know that I kind of piece it together with what I do know about Metroid. It's hard for me to say for somebody coming in completely new if they'll really understand what's going on. But you just need to know that Samus Aran, the hero that you're playing, is not a Metroid. You know, that's the common confusion that people come into this thing.
And Metroid can't Zelda. Crawl. You need to know that too.
Cannot crawl. But yeah, definitely gameplay first, and that's where and I mentioned on the Nintendo Drive as I was just kind of getting into it after the first few hours, it just is very smooth. That was one of the first things that jumped out to me was the frame rate was very smooth, and my recollection of Samus, having only really played the first two games, was that she moved like a tank.
Yep.
And she doesn't move like a tank in this. Very smooth. I'll have comments later. I'm really going to be reserving some of the frustrations that I have, but there's a lot of good stuff to talk about here.
Yeah.
And the first thing that jumped out to me was just how smooth the frame rate was, how silky smooth her movement is, and how fun it was just to traverse as Samus ran around this world.
Well, it was a real testament to that by the fact that you didn't have the morph ball at the beginning of the game this time around, because it's always a Metroid tradition that the very first power-up you always collect is the morph ball in every game, except
it wasn't even close.
Except for this one. Close. Because they actually added the slide to Metroid's to Samus's arsenal. You even have me saying Metroid. You have the slide in Samus's arsenal and right from the beginning, and that allows her to basically slide under different places or go into smaller crevices that normally you'd use the morph ball to go through, but the morph ball is a little bit slower and more clunky than using the slide. So that I think added to that ability, combined with the fact that now you've got, in addition to the melee counter, you've also got the running melee as well this time around. So it allows Samus to be a little more nimble and mobile, and you don't have to rely so much on your long range weapons while you're moving, which I think really adds to the mobility toolkit that was sort of expanded upon in Samus Returns, because in Samus Returns, it was also done by Mercury Steam, who developed Metroid Dread, and they basically started to go in that direction a bit, but they didn't go all the way there. But in this one, I feel like they turned the lever up to 11 and made Samus feel just so much smoother to play as far as the gameplay is concerned, for sure. I agree with you on that point, Sean.
They got to bring that 3DS game to Switch. I really did look for that game because for whatever reason I missed it on 3DS, even though I was into 3DS in those days. I would love for them to bring that back. But yeah, the slide and everything just seems to be you have more than a few options to go about, whether it's traversal or combat as well. You can there's times where I'm sliding in between dudes' legs and stuff. There's really slide was actually quite a bit of fun. And with that said, there's so many different abilities, so many different ways to go about either running around or the combat. I did find myself feeling like a bit of an old man because I'm okay, so the left bumper does this and the R button does this and ZL does I really had to think about it because I was you're using all the buttons and all sorts of different combinations by the end of this thing. I can imagine if this was being played on PC or using a joystick, you've got 100 buttons, different combinations of things that you're using.
Well, especially with Samus Returns in particular, because that was the last game that that Mercury Steam made for Metroid, and they used the bottom screen for selecting a bunch of stuff. That was then mapped to the controls on this game. Some of the Aeon abilities you collect later in this game were actually touchscreen functions in
Right.
Samus Returns rather than being mapped to the D-pad as an example. So you had
and
more
and
buttons.
that's better than what I could imagine would be like an alternative, which would have been something like a Zelda game where you're assigning, like you're gonna have to choose one and then go like your Y button's gonna do this, your X button's gonna do this. Like there's just a lot of different ways to go about it. You can run around shooting all over the place. Of course, the right thumbstick aiming in 360 degrees, or I think it was the L. You hold L and then she stands still and she's aiming. So that's a common thing in, like, since the original Metroid days, the Contra days, those types of things.
Yeah, especially with Super Metroid in particular, because that's where it just kind of started, where you use the L and R buttons to either aim up or aim down at like a 90-degree angle. Well, you could do it while moving in Super Metroid.
Right, but what I'm saying is...
But in this game, it's stationary.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, you definitely have a lot more clutter on the buttons, which it kind of brings me to my first little nitpick for this game. And this comes from the long-term Metroid fan, or even just someone who plays a ton of 2D games, is that having a 2D game and not having the option to control the character with the D-pad makes me a little sad, because I love when playing 2D games. I love using the D-pad versus analog controls, especially with some of the free aim stuff you have in this game, where I found that sometimes my left Joy-Con, for example, might be off by maybe a 5-degree angle or something like that while pointing left, for example. And I would shoot a missile downwards rather than shooting a missile straight. And I found that normally I wouldn't make that type of mistake if I was using the D-pad, but using the analog controls, I ran into that a lot. And to be fair, this was a complaint I had with Samus Returns, because it did the same thing. It just had nothing mapped to the D-pad in that game, but you couldn't use it to control the character either, which was a very bizarre move. So I can understand why they did that with this game, because again, there's a bunch of abilities mapped to the D-pad and you couldn't really map them to the analog stick.
Use every single possible button on this thing.
Yeah, so I can understand why they did it this time around. I just wish there was an option to maybe change controls around to offer that as an option in some way. Even if I had to go into the menu and use more stuff, as someone who loves the D-pad, I would probably be more okay with that. But.
Interesting. I never even thought of it, but I did have to sort of train myself. So I ran into the exact same thing where, I would be aiming, but a couple degrees up or down and missing my target that really was just right in front of me. And so I kind of trained myself to just let go of the aiming. I really had to just fire, because she'll shoot perpendicular to herself, 90 degrees ahead. And I definitely ran into the same thing, but I never thought of the D-pad as my control, just because I always wanted the 360 degree aim, so that's interesting. The D-pad, for sure.
Yeah, and again, that's just me being an old man and being used to old man games like that. So that's
funny.
one of the things I wanted to bring up. But other than that, though, I think one of the things that Metroid has always done very well is its power progression and kind of the path it leads you throughout the game, and kind of making you feel gradually more powerful throughout the game, and it feels really balanced. And I think that they absolutely nailed it with this game in particular. Samus, it feels pretty weak at the beginning of the game, especially if you go back to the beginning after finishing the game. But I love the ramp up to the point where at the end of the game, you just feel so powerful that you could take on anything, except for maybe the final boss. But everything else you feel like you could, take on with ease and just, plow through stuff. But I feel like you never really become too powerful too quickly. I don't feel like the game ever became too easy or too difficult. I feel it was really balanced. And for the most part, if I was dying at a boss fight, it was usually my fault and not the game's fault for not making me feel too powerless, I should say. I feel like it's more because the boss fights, for example, in this game are more about recognizing patterns and then kind of executing on that, rather than, I didn't collect enough missiles or energy tanks to beat this boss. I need to leave, do all that stuff to be more powerful, and then come back to fight the boss.
See, I did a lot of... I feel like I approached this game in a similar way that I approach many RPGs, which is I kind of just went to go OP. I kind of just grinded away, searching everything, because I knew that I wasn't as skilled a player as I probably needed to be to recognize those patterns. In some cases, you almost have to do some of these boss battles perfectly. Yeah. And by the end, I had, I think, over 200 missiles. I think I completed with 75% items and everything. I was almost maxed out on my energy, and still I had a bit of an issue. So a lot of my time was spent just kind of traversing the map and doing those things. There's one power up in particular that really kind of takes you across the finish line, and really helps you traverse that much faster and not really have to deal with the enemies in a time consuming way as possible, or as in earlier in the game, which I thought was good. And it really does, like, when you get that, like, there's so many different things to upgrade, Ryan. There's that morph ball stuff, like, really almost like every part of her body, it seemed like. There's a great screen in the menu that shows, like, this is where all your upgrades are happening. And whether it's something that helps you move, or something that helps you shoot, or whatever, that is really helpful. And then also, of course, it helps you, depending on the upgrade you get, you might be unlocking being able to blast through the different door, or blast through a different block that is appearing that might be granting you access to a secret area, or really like the next area. And for me, there's I have a few videos, like gameplay kind of clips that I did, which showed the game's amazing level design, where I could have gotten really, really lost. And it kind of like contained me to an area before, so that I could make sure I got whatever upgrade I was needing to then go kind of freely back. But I really could have wasted a lot of time if it didn't do it that well. Yeah,
for sure. Like, I think that the level design in particular, like, hats off to the developers that work.
It's so complex.
Yeah, exactly. And just properly balancing it and making sure that you get all the items you need to in one area first before kind of proceeding. However, I don't know if you knew this, Sean, but this is something I wanted to bring up here. And there's a bunch of videos emerging over the course of basically ever since the game launched until now. And this is something that's always been around in all of the 2D Metroid games, and that is sequence breaking. So the game is purposely designed so you can actually get through certain areas faster or get certain items earlier if you know where to look. Because there are actually specific places on the map, for example, to like get one of the late game suits like half an hour into the game, for example.
What?
Yeah. Or there's, if you get one of the items early, which is the bombs, which everyone knows from classic Metroid games.
Yeah,
so it's not really a spoiler to see that. There's a boss that you can kill in one hit if you find the bombs before you fight that boss. So there's
I love it.
There's little things like that and little secrets in the game that are just peppered in them there that are not super obvious to find, but if you know where to look, you can totally break the game in crazy ways, which is why we're seeing like speedrunners already having times for this game close to under an hour for beating this game. Which is
crazy. There's two things there that you kind of bring up. One, like it seems like there's a spirit of just an old school game here, like really through and through. And I feel like that is one of those things where like you can almost break it, but in a, I don't know, kind of a clever, skilled kind of way. Like that doesn't sound to me like the game is broken. It seems like there's
is
a
done
particular
on purpose.
path.
You can tell.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, like that's special, man. Like that's the thing that it really does feel like it just has the soul of the old Metroid games. Like anybody can, and we've seen that's why it's a genre now. Anybody can make like a map and you upgrade your abilities and all these different things. But like it's that additional piece to me that really screams that this is they knew the assignment. I think is the meme. They understood the assignment
for sure. So speaking of some of the combat. One thing I wanted to talk about are some of the bosses and the enemies that you fight in this. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this game that is kind of unique to this game, especially because the last, original Metroid 2D game we got was Fusion, was the enemies and bosses. You don't really have a lot of crossover with previous Metroid games. There's only one returning boss this time around. Usually there's a couple, if not like 3 or 4, or sometimes half the bosses are returning from previous games. Likewise, there's not a lot of recycled enemies from previous Metroid games. You're fighting a lot of different foes this time around, and a lot of foes I was not expecting to fight in this, knowing, again, some of the Metroid lore behind some of the games that, again, maybe we won't talk about here because it would be spoilers. And I don't want to talk about spoilers here. But I thought that as a longtime Metroid fan, I thought that was really refreshing and interesting too, that you had a bunch of different types of enemies. And it all kind of starts with the Emmy as well, which I know, Sean, you probably have lots to say about the Emmy. But I have probably a different take from you than the Emmy, on the Emmy, particularly because I love horror games, especially stuff like Amnesia, The Dark Descent, or Outlast, or Alien Isolation, where you're running away from like overpowered threats that will easily dismantle you. And that's kind of the reason they're created. And that's kind of how I felt about the Emmy in this game. And I loved kind of the level of tension it kind of created with them around. But I know that that's just speaking from my experience of liking those types of games and those experiences. Whereas Sean, I think you had a much different take on the Emmy, right?
Yeah, but I don't want to like yuck on your yum here, and this does seem to be a very divisive type of thing. There are some people out there who I've talked to who really, really love the Emmy thing, and this was a giant focus. I will say there's I actually learned from the guys over at the House of Mario podcast who had mentioned that you actually can. You can counter. There's a very quick moment where you can actually counter. I'm like, oh snap!
There's actually two.
There's two
moments you can counter.
Right, and it's like it makes sense because it tells you it's a rule that the game follows throughout. Where there's like a flash, and it's like basically anytime you see that flash, whether it's a boss or an enemy or whatever, like you can counter this thing. And yeah, like it kind of gives you a little bit of hope. And the first time you do it, I will say, first time you counter an enemy, you're like, oh my god! Like,
you're almost also just like paralyzed. You're like, oh my god, wait, I wasn't expecting that. What do I do?
Didn't know what to do. Didn't know where to run. So
and it just kills you anyways.
There is hope there. So there at least there's that. For me, like it honestly didn't even like strike me as like as a horror thing. It just struck me. It didn't seem like a haunting stalker or anything like that. It just seemed like a pain in the butt. But the reward, generally speaking, was worth it. Pretty much every time. There's a bunch of these Emmys that are sort of like scattered throughout the world that we're crawling through here, and I always wanted to. I was focused on where I was going, and then the Emmy would sort of like plop up and go like, golly, I really just wanted to get to this other part. It just felt like such an inconvenience. I was, and a lot of times because I was just trying to, like I said, like I had my eye set on another point in the map, which kind of brings up maybe naturally one of my gripes with the game is I wish there was a fast travel. Maybe we just jump back to that a little bit later, and I'm sure there's a legacy reason for that.
There is fast travel eventually, but you have to. There are teleporters in the games.
Yeah,
and once you get all the teleporters, there is fast travel then. But you're right; it's like very late in the game that you get that.
Yeah, and that's like I wanted to wander around more. So, anyways, the reason the Emmys don't really hit for me is because it did feel like, you know, whatever you were wanting to do, you just got to stop and take care of these Emmys. But they do add variety. You know, like it is.
Yeah, they definitely break up the experience. They don't. Otherwise, it might feel like too monotonous, or you'd be finished the game so much quicker that way too. Like you'd breeze through it probably.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm split on it, and there's one in particular because you know there's so many different environments in this game. That's the one thing that you kind of get a sense pretty early on that everything's normal, and then you open up a door and it's like, oh my god, the room is on fire. I can't go in there. I'll come back later, and it kind of. People can imagine where it might go from there, kind of typical, you know, this environment, that environment, those types of different climates. And there's one in particular, I don't want to spoil it, but Ryan, I messaged you like where traversal was challenging in this one area, and they throw an Emmy right in the middle of it, and I'm just like, it's a double fail in my estimation, and it kind of is representative of maybe the last third of the game where things really started to struggle for me. And it's worth saying at this moment that we're recording this like an hour after I completed the game. Yeah. So some of the late game frustrations are still pretty fresh in my mind, but that's not to say that. And what I really want to be clear about is that this game is really, really good. Like overall, my overall thoughts are that it's really good and people probably should play it, but it's one of the most challenging games that you can get on the Nintendo Switch. Like I would say that.
I don't know. Dark Souls is technically on Nintendo Switch, Sean. So
right, and I think it's like right up there, and that's like that's the namesake. Like that's the true hallmark of Metroid. Like everybody, one of the reasons I wasn't so stoked about getting this game from the start, Ryan, is because I knew about the escape sequence on Super Metroid, and it's like. I could never do that. I could never actually finish that thing. And there's probably going to be something like that at the end of this game. And I'm like, I don't want an ending like Super Metroid because I can't beat that. That scared me away. And I don't even know how to wrap a recommendation around that because I think that probably should scare some people because the ending is hard. Yeah. But the rest of the game is very, very good. So you just kind of have to take the good with the bad, I think, in that perspective.
I would say that it was like the level of difficulty is like, I think it's a rewarding level of difficulty where when you beat a boss,
most of the
times I feel pretty good when beating a boss. But again, I'm talking about this from the perspective of someone who's beaten every Metroid game, who didn't actually struggle with a lot of the bosses in this game, mainly because I built up, like I've learned kind of this type of boss design over the years of playing other Metroid games.
Right.
So for me, like I'm coming at it from a completely different perspective than a new player. So I love hearing your perspective on it, like Sean, because it is from like a fresh set of eyes, someone who's not, super ingrained in this franchise and definitely is seeing it from a different perspective than I am. Because to me, it wasn't like I wasn't struggling too much, but again, I just expect this. I know what to expect with this type of experience. So like when bosses do certain patterns, I'm able to recognize it very quickly because of just I'm so used to these types of games. Like Super Metroid, I've beaten that game like almost 100 times now, Sean.
And you're just calm,
I literally
cool,
have it
collected.
memorized. I play it. I could beat that game in an hour and a half. Like
I'd love to watch you do it. I'd actually. Well, yeah, I guess I have for Extra Life. I'd love to see you do it again because I'm sitting over here just like freaking out, man. I'm just like I can't miss the thing, and I'm probably gripping the controller maybe a little bit too tight, and I feel like my resistance kind of like I said, in that back third of the game really started to ramp up because for the most part, like the first 2/3. I was doing pretty good. And the other thing that is maybe worth bringing up here too is the clock, the time clock that everybody is talking about. There's a lot of conversation about, a lot of people posting their times at the end. And I tweeted this out, like it's worth noting that it is in no way representative of your game time.
No,
like
it's
not for me, like not even close, like by a factor probably 3 or 4.
Yeah, because it doesn't take into consideration pausing the game.
Right.
Or putting it in suspend mode or dying because it essentially when you die it resets the clock back to where the checkpoint picks up.
So if you're me, you die like 400 times and that's like a gigantic portion of the game. So from if people are doing the whole like value equation of X number of hours for a $60 US game or $80 here in Canada, like just throw that out the window, man. Like I got a lot of time out of this and I felt like I hit a certain hour point, or at least the game clock said I was at a certain point, and I thought I was almost done based on all the other screens that I was seeing. I'm like, I must be wrapping this up. So even I was chatting with you, like I'll be ready by, the next night. And it wasn't even close because that game clock that everybody's talking about really, really threw me off. So I wanted to kind of pass that along in a review.
Yeah, and while you were talking, I was looking up on because I have my Switch OLED right by me, so I was looking it up. I was like, oh, maybe enough time has passed for the Switch to tell me how long I'd actually played outside of my clock time, because my clock time was 6 hours and 22 minutes, I believe.
Mine was double that.
Yeah.
Mine was 13 plus. I think, more than 13 hours.
But you also collected way more items than I did as well.
Which was great. That was my favorite part, by the way. Exploring, going to find all the things, getting a new power up, being able to unlock a new area, like seeing a spot there. I'm like, I got to come back to that place. I got to come. And then I do, and I get the thing. That was very, very cool.
In fact, for perspective sake, Sean, like out of the three of us, because Matt Sawinski, my PlayStation Drive co-host, also played the game. He ended the game with 32% of the items, and I ended the game with 47% of the items. So you're
I went nuts.
You collected way more items than both of us did, which is crazy.
Well, and I didn't want it to end like that. That really goes to show what I enjoyed about the game and what I didn't. What I didn't enjoy was like the end boss, some of the one of the last Emmys, those types of things. I really enjoyed wandering around the world, and I wish that part was a little bit more. I don't want to say the word easy, but I wish it was a little bit like facilitated with that fast travel. Would have been so much better.
And speaking of fast travel, to answer your question from earlier, Sean, there is another game with fast travel in the Metroid series, and it was the last one we got, which was Metroid Samus Returns from Mercury Steam. Had fast travel that basically there were teleporters all around the planet, and then there was one at the beginning of each zone, and you could just go to the teleporter and teleport to any zone you wanted to. Which I don't understand why they didn't do that here either. Again, I'm the type of person who didn't mind having to run backwards, because then I would usually find little things along the way, which is why I was like, I kind of like the journey of running back and forth. But you're right. Like I wish it, for accessibility's sake, I wish that would have been an addition they would have added for sure. Especially because it was in their last game. So I'm actually surprised that they didn't do it this time. Which is
it probably would have broken the complexity of the map. Like it probably would have been just another thing to consider, which I understand. But oh man, there are some times where I just I would have loved to go to another area of the game and just clear that out completely. But I literally was like, and maybe this is just a function of you and I needing to do this review with you on we're kind of on a timeline there. But I'm like, I'm almost completed this area, and I'd love to just fast travel back there and just clear it out. Now that I've got everything, I've got all the abilities, I can actually do that. But yeah, it's the map itself is so complex. It's not like you can just go, oh, it's down and to the left. Like you kind of have to know every single turn and nook and cranny and everything to get there. So I found myself, as much as I was traversing in the game, doing that and then getting right back to the menu and back at the map, back to the game, back to the map. Like I was doing that quite a lot, which again, might just be a Metroid game.
Real talk, Sean. How many times did you get lost? Can you count them on one hand? Did you get lost very often? What do you think?
No, I don't know. I don't know that I would really ever call myself like lost. There were some times where I knew where I wanted to go and couldn't get there. I don't know if that's necessarily lost, but I guess I always knew like where I was. And the map does a really good job, I would say, to show, man, it just shows you where you are and where you've been. And like if you've unlocked sort of like an area on the map that kind of shows the outline, just that little like highlighted area that shows like this is exactly where you've traversed, I found helpful. I think I heard the guys on Player One podcast talk about this too, where I'll just steal it from them because I agree, where I would have liked to like filter the icons on the map. Like show me where all of one of these things are, the doors or these items. I would love to see that a little bit more easily because the map is pretty complex. Like the level design itself and then just a ton of stuff.
They're expecting you to use those 6 markers they give you, like 6 colored markers on the map, and that's it.
You should. People should use that. And I waited too late in the game to actually use those markers, but they are very, very helpful.
Then the reason I wanted to ask that, Sean, is I actually got lost once because there was a section where I was like, I have no idea where to go next because I didn't realize I had to shoot a missile at a specific block, like a piece of the wall to kind of break through there.
I would say that. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't count that as lost, but that happens lots.
Well, I mean, it led to me running around for 45 minutes trying to find where to go and kind of really like backtracking 2 or 3 times. So I would say that happened to me once, but after that, I didn't really have a problem like that kind of come up with again. But I just wanted to point that out here, for full transparency. So all in all, as far as the gameplay is concerned, I think we both agree. It's pretty fun.
It's rock solid.
You're really going to enjoy the gameplay, I think. If you like Metroidvanias, I think you're really going to enjoy the combat of the game. But before we kind of go to kind of overall thoughts, there's 2 things I want to touch on real quick. Number 1, visuals. I think this game is gorgeous. One of the things I love about it too are some of the cinematics you have during combat, for example, like when you melee encounter a boss, for example, and like how cinematic some of those moves that Samus pulls off are. Like some of them are really incredibly choreographed, and I love just the looks of it, especially like the melee encounters towards some of the bosses towards the end of the game, in particular the final boss. Like I was like, my jaw was on the floor with some of this stuff. It looked awesome. But
I mean, no, I couldn't have put it better myself the whole time you're saying. I'm like, I don't know if there's really much to add here, but like the cinematography just in general really hit once I started playing the game. Again, I saw a lot of this stuff when they were hyping up the game at E3 and ever since then, but like for whatever reason, it just didn't really land for me. And then playing the game and like just being in it and being in it's very claustrophobic. Like you're in very tight spaces, and whenever the camera kind of shifted, I felt like it did it always to serve the game and always to serve my experience with it and draw me in that much more, and to kind of like buy into what people I think have been saying for decades, which is that Samus is a badass. And I'm like, okay, like she's a space marine kind of thing. Like she seems fine. I've never had anything bad to say about the character.
She blows up planets.
I know, but she like, I don't know. Like I don't know if it's her posture or what. Like she has a couple like mic drop moments. I feel like I think it was one of the very first bosses. I was like, okay, she is a real, like she's vicious. She doesn't just like pew pew like lasers. Like she hates these things. Like everything that she kills, she has a disdain and just an aggression for that. I guess I wasn't really expecting, so I was glad to see that kind of come out in the character, even though she doesn't really say anything.
Well, she's very much, again, the inspiration for Samus came from Ellen Ripley from Aliens.
Right. Aliens.
And you can definitely tell like those 2 characters are very similar as far as the way they, design and position Samus, like the way you kind of feel as Samus in the environment is the same feeling I feel like when you play Ellen Ripley in an Alien game, for example. Like the tone is very similar, even though like Samus is super overpowered in some instances, or she's overpowered when you compare her to our technology. Like sometimes that overpoweredness doesn't save her in the darkness of space, Sean, which is up against some of these crazy bosses.
And no one can hear you scream.
Exactly. Well,
that was on the poster, I think, right?
It was on the poster.
Yeah, it was on the poster. Yeah, nailed it.
We should talk about the story because we didn't talk about that. And especially because you brought up the fact that Samus doesn't talk, because Samus does talk a tiny bit, but that's it. She barely talks in this whole game. And well, when she talks too, there's a couple cinematics where she talks in a different language.
Which
I loved as a huge lore person for Metroid, but again, I'm not going to spoil the context for that. All I'm going to say for this, and kind of to give like a quick story synopsis, is basically you play as Samus. The game takes place after Metroid Fusion, which was the fourth game in the Metroid franchise on Game Boy Advance, where basically the Metroids are all dead at this point, as well as the space pirates are basically defeated. And the Metroids, though, were kind of bred for the purpose of containing this alien race called the X-Parasites, which basically absorb matter and basically are able to duplicate it. So they absorb people, and then they can basically become the people or like robots or other different things. And in Metroid Fusion, basically, Samus like wipes out the main planet of the X, and that's kind of how that game ends. So this picks up after that, where basically Samus receives a transmission that the X are still alive on this new planet. ZRT, I think is what it's called. It's kind of a dumb name. But
that's what I thought.
Yeah. You go to the planet, though, and you're immediately attacked by a Chozo, which I thought was super interesting, called Ravenbeak. But again, I won't talk too much about him in particular. But basically, after being defeated by him, you basically lose your powers, and you kind of have to, get all your powers back and basically escape to your ship and leave the planet. Like the whole plot is basically centered around like an escape from the planet, not so much trying to take down Mother Brain or trying to restore a ship or anything like that. Like it's very different tonally from a lot of the other Metroid stories, which I thought was really cool. Also, I think there was a lot of great moments involving the Chozo as well, which we don't hear a lot about in the games, because the Chozo was kind of this super advanced alien race of like bird-like people who would basically raise Samus from birth and basically gave her the power suit. Like the power suit that she has was made from Chozo technology, and they basically like trained her to basically be the perfect warrior to basically get back at the space pirates who were constantly attacking the Chozo and basically had killed Samus's parents. And this is all outlined in the Metroid manga, as well as some other stuff like the Metroid instruction manuals on the NES. So again, that would explain, Sean, why you'd be so lost with some of the story stuff, because they catered a lot of the story in this game to Metroid dorks like me, like people who have been following the series like ever since the beginning, who know the story of Metroid, who have read other stuff. But I will say that it definitely hurts to see stuff like this in a game that I love so much, that I know is going to be totally fly over your head, Sean, or anyone else who's new to the game. Like, I wish they would have explained some more of this stuff in a better way, so that you get some more understanding of some of the stuff that goes on in this game.
I know that, and I know that you, like, as a fan of the series, like, you want other people to have that same level of appreciation. I will say that I'm glad of the discipline that they kind of instilled here, and that I just got to play the game. Like, basically, as soon as like the game starts up and it's like Samus is on planet ZRD, whatever the hell, and it's like, it sounds like an Acura car. Like, in which case it might as well have just been like planet 1400. Like, it's a space planet. There's aliens. There's things that you don't understand.
Once again,
like,
they pretty much did the alien thing where they gave the name a code, the planet a code word, essentially.
Exactly.
Like an acronym.
It doesn't even have like a name. So, and even if it did, it's just like, whatever. I'm stranded on this planet. I know that I've got to get to my ship. Thank you for laying up that premise for me. There's bad guys in the way. There seems to be like this computer thing that is helping me out as well. They seem friendly, and off we go. And it just like, that's all good. So it feels like there's actually a good balance here. Like, you and I coming at this review from our perspectives, I think is awesome, because you're super stoked that you got all your lore and there's a whole bunch of stuff there for you. I'm super stoked because like that didn't get too much in the way for me to just like play the game, because if it was too much in the way, it'd be like, oh my God, like who cares about this planet ZRD, whatever the hell. I just wanted to play it, and the game at least let me do that. So I was perfectly fine. But when you say there's manga involved, like if there's something deeper to get involved here, then like that does capture my interest a little bit. Yeah.
Then you can learn more about all the stuff and why it was cool, like that certain things happen later in the game. But also, one of the things I liked about the story was like how the Emmy kind of fit into things too, because they're not like from that planet.
Yes.
Like some of the bad eyes didn't build them. It's like the Galactic Federation sent them there to basically go like look up DNA for stuff there, and then they just so happen to be bad. And again, it explains how they became bad in the story, which I thought was cool.
And their reason for hunting you is awesome. Like it really, like once that gets revealed, and you don't have to be a Metroid dork to really understand that. Like they explain that pretty clearly, and the reason the Emmys are hunting you. I don't think that was in the pre stuff. Like, right, that's a story beat that they actually
that's
reveal.
a thing
like,
that they only explain in the game, which is why I'm not touching on.
Yeah, same. Okay, good. Yeah, no, that is worthwhile. That reveal is really awesome. You're like, okay, it almost could have been done a little bit earlier because it is very menacing. Like the reason they're after you is just like, golly, keep these things away from me.
Yeah, for sure. So as we round out this conversation, John, and move to overall thoughts, we actually asked for questions from the community.
Nice.
And we received 2, but they're both pretty much about the same thing. So, and they both kind of relate to, should new Metroid players start here? So let's start with Nintendo Pals, at Nintendo Pals on Twitter. And they asked the question, as someone who has hardly played any Metroid games prior to Dread, I can now say I'm a Metroid fan. This game is awesome. I'm hooked. Gameplay, graphics, story, cutscenes, everything just hits perfectly. Lives up to the hype. I am now extra excited to try Metroid Prime 4. And that's from Andross over there at Nintendo Pals. So shout out to Andross for that. And then we got Tim at NeoPrime33 who asks, out of the 5 games that have come out of this story arc, where does Metroid Dread fall for you? You can choose the remakes of Metroid 1 and 2 or the originals, but this does not include the Prime series or other M's. So again, the 5 games that kind of fall in this sequence are Metroid 1 or Metroid Zero's Mission, Metroid 2 or Metroid Return to Samus, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and then this game. Those are the 5 games that essentially make up this 5-game series, essentially, that have the story flow from one to the other. I mean, the Prime games actually take place between Metroid 1 and 2. They're technically part of the timeline, and they're not non-canon or anything like that. And Metroid Other M is its own thing. So I'm glad, Tim, that you didn't make me kind of rank it. As far as these 5 games and where they kind of fall for me, like I actually... And I'm going to maybe go to you for this as well, Sean, although, again, you haven't played too many of the Metroid games as well. Where I kind of rank this on the Metroid tree as far as my favorite Metroid games. Now that I've had about a week since I've finished the game to kind of process this, at first I was really high on it, but then after I got time to think about it really clearly, I think that it falls behind Super Metroid. Super Metroid's still probably my favorite in the series, just because I think it's such a timeless game and an amazing game to go revisit. I also like Metroid Prime 1, the original, more than this, but I think this is probably my 3rd favorite Metroid game of all the Metroid games. I love it more than Samus Returns. I love it more than Fusion. I love it more than Zero Mission. And that's kind of where I sit on this. So, Sean, I know since, again, you haven't played a lot of the Metroid games, you're pretty new to this. I'm going to ask you the question, should new Metroid players start here? What do you think?
Man, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know. It is challenging. Like, it's hard for me to go like, yeah, everybody should just play. Like, it's hard. There's no way around it. And it's funny because like I think about a game like Ori and the Blind Forest or Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and I heard a lot of people saying that they thought those games were challenging, and I feel like I was in your shoes going like I didn't have really the same issue. Like that wouldn't have been the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or even 5th descriptor that I would have used for Ori, where here it's like one of the top 3. Like the difficulty is a thing. But I feel like it's welcoming enough in terms of the way that it sets out its premise and the story and everything, in which case that, yeah, like if you have no idea what's going on in Metroid, like there's nothing here that stops you from having a good time. It's just that the game is going to push on you. This is not there's almost no tutorials. It sort of has like a nice in-game design. Anytime you are presented with a new upgrade or something, like you have to use it to get out of that space. You will not be able to like leave without using that new blast cannon or whatever the heck.
It's the classic Mario teaching approach where it'll totally teach you through gameplay when to use certain things. And then as you start to play around with some of the abilities, you then discover some of the secret stuff that I talked about before, like some of the secret sequence breaking stuff, which can totally break the game if you know what to do with it. So, but at the same time, it doesn't tell you all this stuff. Like it does give you some like a mini tutorial window when you pick up an item, but that briefly explains a little bit of what it does, and then that's it. Like I love that it kind of lets you kind of discover it on your own, because we really don't see a lot of the games nowadays that kind of do that.
Yeah, it's funny that the time, the amount of gameplay in terms of hours became such a dominant part of the conversation, because I feel like if you have time on your side, like if you have the ability to be patient with this game, it will reward you in spades. Like if you just explore and don't rush anything, then you will have an awesome time. But for me, that's when things started to ramp up in difficulties, when I really started to like, okay, now I need to get to the end. I need to do this review. Like I think that had part of it. But if you have time and you just like, you should just explore the map and just go see what you can go find, because there's tons to find here.
And it's worth exploring. Like, it's an awesome planet to go explore.
Yeah.
Like, I know one of the things that people were worried about it when we saw the first look of it, like the first trailer of it at E3, was just there would be like, it's going to be like this industrial locale, and it wasn't going to be this like lush, beautiful planet. But as you go through it, you're like, holy crap, some of these places look amazing.
Yeah, very, very different, and lots of variety in the settings for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I think that's a great point. And yeah, as long as you go into it knowing, you know, you might have a tough time with the difficulty, I think it's a great pickup. And honestly, would I recommend this game? Absolutely, 100%. If you're a Metroid fan, you should play it. If you like Metroidvanias but maybe haven't played a Metroid game before, give it a try. Just know that it'll be a little difficult, but I mean, have some fun with it, because to your point, Sean, it's definitely rewarding if you stick with it, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I know you're trying to. I know we're gonna wrap up here. A couple things I needed to say though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Double jump is not my friend. I hate the double jump in this game. Eventually, and it's not much of a spoiler to say that you do eventually get a double jump, the ability to to double jump. You jump again. Not good, but this is a classic Metroid thing, as I understand it, is like you have to time it very well. And this is one of the things that you said that whenever you died, you felt like it was your own fault. It wasn't the game's fault. I think that's more or less what you said. That was not the case for me. I died a lot, especially near the end, where I was like, I feel like I did it. I feel like I had the double jump down and it didn't double jump, and I just end up like either falling into the stream of bullets coming my way, or wasn't able to dodge out of the way.
Or you just jump right into the enemy's hands, which is always my favorite thing to do.
Dude, those are the moments where I like my controller it's a good thing that it was expensive, because otherwise it would have been broken into two pieces. Some of the most frustrating stuff is that double jump end. And like I said, at the very end, you've got all of the tools available to you. Then it almost felt like it was like tripping up over itself. So that's what I'm left with. That's the most fresh memory that I've got in my brain as I just finished the game, was that dang old double jump, my friend. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, luckily you don't have it for too long, because it changes pretty quickly. But
it does. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even then, it's just, the ability itself, it does get better, but even still, like, I needed to count on it. You know, I need to be able to, like, if I hit the button, I need to elevate. And it wasn't always the case for me, my friend. So
then last question before we sign off, Sean, that I have to ask, because we're getting to that time of year. We're only 2 months away from Game of the Year talk.
I can't.
We're going to be getting Game of the Year nominees for the Game Awards in like 2 weeks. If you had to vote today, where would you lie with this game? Is it behind Tales? Because I know Tales has been your front runner for a while.
Yeah, no, Tales is still my front runner, 100%. I have a huge amount of appreciation for this game. I'm glad that I have finished it. But honestly, Ryan, like, all I can think about doing right now is either go play like Paint by Numbers to just relax a little bit, maybe play a little bit of Tetris Effect Connected, because that game is gorgeous, or Ori. Like Ori, like it's hard, because Ori is such a special game for all the reasons we talked about for this, but also its story and its art style. Like, there's a lot of things that I love there. So unfortunately, I don't think this is in the running for me. I'm left with almost equal parts frustration as I am with appreciation for the game, and that leaves me in a bit of a conflicting spot. Definitely one of the better games I played this year, but it's not tackling Tales for top spot.
So for me, I come at from an interesting angle, because again, I'm such a huge Metroid fan. So if I was to rate it as to Ryan Turford's personal the Game of the Year, taking all editorial things out of my brain,
sure,
then I would actually put it as my Game of the Year. It's definitely
you're just geeking out the whole time.
It's my favorite experience I've had playing any game this year. In fact, it's one of my favorite 2D game experiences in the last 10 years.
Yeah,
but if I take myself out of the equation and think about it editorially, as like if I was actually to vote for it, let's say if we were doing a Yumi Capri voting at the end of the year, Sean, I would actually probably go toward Tales instead, because I think that Tales, I think, is a smoother experience from beginning to end. Even though I know you had your qualms with the back half of that game, I feel like, you know, with everything that Tales does, I might actually put it above Metroid. So if I had to vote today, it would still probably be Tales, but in my heart of hearts, just know that that was easily Metroid Dread is the best thing I played this year.
But for
me
ours,
personally.
okay, well, we'll chat about this more, I'm sure, on one of our shows at some point. But for ours, like, I feel like you don't need to have like an editorial approach to the Yumi Capri kind of like game of the year type of stuff.
I know, but
like,
I always find it interesting to kind of compare the two of them together and kind of take my personal bias out of it because again, it gives you two different perspectives as to like evaluating games, I guess.
No, I like it. I'm glad you brought it up in those two different ways because like there's a critique that you can be looking at this game, or you're just like, I can't believe this is a Metroid game and Samus and oh my gosh and blasting the things and all the like. You kind of overlook maybe some of the shortcomings or the halting reservations, which I think we've gone over as well.
Yeah, for sure. And especially like the fact that it's even broke my top 3 Metroid games of all time, where Metroid Zero Mission was already in my top 10 games of all time. And I think this is a better game than that. Like, it's definitely up there for me personally. So yeah, as a Metroid fan, I absolutely loved it. I couldn't have asked for anything better. And I can't wait to see what they do next. Like, that's more than anything. It's like they've laid the groundwork with this incredible experience. I just want to see what they do with the next game and how much more they can evolve that formula with another crack at this, I think. So,
yeah. Definitely.
There you go. I think that kind of rounds out our conversation. So before we go, Sean Plugs, go.
Oh, that's it. That's the end. Okay. You can find me on Twitter at Sean Capri, Sean like Connery, Capri like the pants. And if you like this, and if you like Ryan and I chatting about video games, we do this every single week on the Xbox Drive as well, which we've been told that even people who don't have an Xbox listen to that show and they seem to enjoy that. So you can find that on all your podcast stuff. And you can support the show and everything else we do over at patreon.com/Yumi Capri.
Very nice, my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can also find us on Twitter at Yumi Capri's and on YouTube, youtube.com/Yumi Capri, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Sean Capri, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been The Extra Mile, all about Metroid Dread, and we out.